Hi, this is Renee Veldman-Tentori, and this is a presentation on my master's research on how can e-learning enhance study success at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. I'll be presenting this as a thesis defense on the 19th of July, and this is my first run. So let's take a step back in time. Education and learning has always been about capturing and communicating knowledge. Learning is nothing new, but education evolves. The background and context of this study is looking at HEIs, which is higher educational institutions in the Netherlands, and then more specifically zooming in for the fieldwork at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. There's a number of international societal trends that are having a big impact on the way that we learn. One of them is globalization and internationalization. Another is rapid technological advances. And the third is the rise of social media as a communication tool. So all of these international societal trends have led to learning becoming commonly now e-learning. We now have students that are digital natives. They're practically born next to a computer, and their needs, expectations, and learning styles are changing. Children start engaging with technology at a really early age. This is actually my daughter at school. They start with iPads in the classroom every week from their first year of school when they're 4. So that means that when these digital natives are getting to university studies, because they've already been coming through with all of this technology, it seems that textbooks and PowerPoints often lead to low flexibility and engagement for the students. But e-learning offers opportunities and options, but this is happening so fast that it's quite difficult for educators and the students to keep up with this trend. So why I've chosen this topic is I'm a part-time lecturer at the Hague University of Applied Sciences for 3 years now, teaching topics such as marketing and e-business. My area is marketing and communications, and I've run my own small business for 10 years now as a social media specialist, both in Australia and the Netherlands. And I have experience with both traditional face-to-face as well as e-learning. So I thought it would be really interesting to delve into this a lot further with this research. The aim is to recognise the evolution of e-learning in higher educational institutions and explore how individuals and organisations, and most specifically the Hague University of Applied Sciences, may be able to better understand and take advantage of this trend. There were 3 objectives: to provide a compact but thorough overview of e-learning and study success as relevant to higher education institutions, explore the constructs of e-learning and study success in practice at this university, and formulate a set of practical recommendations for the educators there. A point to make at the outset is there is still a place for face-to-face. With Google, some people seem to think with e-learning coming in, if I have Google, why do I need an education? That's not the point being made here. And in fact, you'll see in the research that comes out, e-learning plus face-to-face equals what's called blended. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail soon. But e-learning is not necessarily replacing face-to-face, and that's why I've used the word enhance. How can it enhance study success? There is in fact a continuum of technology-based learning shown in my thesis by Bates, and I am looking at everything from the face-to-face teaching on the left, the no e-learning, I'm not, but everything else on the right of that is classed as e-learning. This is the structure of my thesis and the research navigator that was used throughout the document and lining up with the research questions. So there's 5 chapters. In this presentation, I'm just giving a really brief highlight of the way the research was done and a few of the key findings, and then of course everything in great detail in the document itself. I started with a literature review, so I looked at the various topics, the various academic journals and books related to e-learning and study success. This is just a sample of some of them. And I looked at the definitions because this is a really core grounding to be able to come up with a definition, because this varies drastically, as my research also uncovered and confirmed. So the definitions that I've used in this research are here. So e-learning is learning conducted using electronic, digital and/or online methods, and study success is the gaining of knowledge and reaching personal academic goals. It's important to note that e-learning can also be referred to as online learning and digital learning. And in the literature review, I was looking at research question 1, which is which elements are most relevant to e-learning in the context of higher education. And over on the right there, with study success, it can also be called things like quality and achievement. And research question number 2 is which elements were most most relevant to study success in the context of higher education. So this literature review spanned quite a few months. I actually started back in November last year, and I based a previous module literature review on this, and I've gone into great depth. I found it really, really interesting, but people don't have the time to read the amount of things that I've learned. So what I did is I took all of this months and months and months of reading on the topic, and I compacted it into a conceptual model. So this here represents what the most relevant elements are for both e-learning and study success in the context of higher education. At this stage, I was looking at higher education in general. I am reading only English as my native language, so it was mostly in those countries that use English as a main language, although I did read some Dutch documents as well. And these are the themes or elements that I have come up with. So glancing at this conceptual model actually gives a really robust overview if you want to know about these two topics. And I've linked the two of them because the rest of the research was looking to try and establish a relationship between e-learning and study success. This is actually my very first research project. I have a Bachelor's of Business in Australia, but we didn't do a thesis and a research project then. So now for my master's, I was really interested in learning about all the different research styles. This was really time consuming, but very, very interesting for me to learn. And I have been through this textbook literally cover to cover and looked at all of these different options for research design and analyze which would be the best to answer my research questions. And these are the ones that I came up with. I won't go into great depth, but mainly to say that of all the different ways that you can design your research project, I feel confident that the ones that I've chosen were the best ones to answer the research questions. These are the actual research questions. So my central one I opened with, and then the other 6 were supporting that central research question. So delineating and breaking down how I could answer that question. And I broke up the research into theoretical, so I've just talked about the literature review, and then the empirical, which is the actual field work. And I'll talk about how I came up with those research decisions as well. Quality concerns were central throughout, so I used multiple measures to ensure quality, and I've detailed these within the thesis. But this was something I really wanted this to be a robust, credible document, so this was central all the time. I used 3 different data gathering instruments, and the reason I did this is I wanted this to be a really practical but robust, deep, quality research project. So I could have just done one, but by doing the whole 3, it was more time consuming, but it meant that my research is more reliable and valid because I cross-referenced the results of each of these 3 strategies to come up with answering my research questions. I processed and analysed the data with different techniques as well, and used different instruments there, again detailed in great depth in the thesis, so I won't go into it too much in the presentation. Just very briefly to highlight some of the results. So in the observation, so this is 6 months of systematic observation being an internal researcher, because I was working part-time and still am at the Hague University as a lecturer, and I was also a part-time student for this master's. I split it into internal communication, internal events, and industry events and benchmarking, and gathered a whole stack of data to answer the research questions. So firstly, when I observed that with internal communication, There are a lot of different things going on with internal communication. There's things like policies and programs and frameworks. There's an internal social network called Yammer. There is a great website called Learn IT, but wasn't being used a lot, and it's only on the intranet. Blackboard, which is the learning management system. There is a portal, it's called, where all general announcements and a lot of information are happening. There are e-newsletters, so there's a weekly organizational-wide e-newsletter. There's a faculty one for BFM, which is the business, finance and marketing, where I was situated. There's also a weekly staff newsletter for the program I was working on. There's a news site, there's social media in action with both educators and students. There is an app, there are student projects going on. So all in all, there are many, many internal communication channels going on at any one time. And that's an interesting point, that there are so many. The majority there are all official. WhatsApp is the only one that's not, but I've included it because so many students and educators are using it. Then I looked at different events that were going on that were related to my research. There's things like faculty days, and this was interesting because it was all about just, it's called BFM, the Business, Finance and Marketing Faculty 2.0, and that was all about digitisation in education. There was an international conference held late 2016 with follow-up internal events on collaborative online international learning. There are program meetings and things like how to calculate target success. Feedback Fruits is a new e-learning type app that's plugged into Blackboard. So there were a couple of events teaching educators how to use that. There were internal elections, and there's a training and professional development department at the university. So again, just like internal communication channels, there's a lot going on. And then even though the scope of the research and the fieldwork is just to look at The Hague University, I thought it was important to also take a look outside, so the industry events and benchmarking, to see what else is happening in the Netherlands, because it's important that the university looks at what's happening around them. And there's also a lot of partnerships. So for example, the study store sell all the textbooks that the students need, and they're getting very involved, both the study store themselves as well as the individual textbook companies, in more and more e-learning. There was a McGraw-Hill Digital Learning Day held in Rotterdam, which I attended, and they had a lot of different HEIs represented there, including Erasmus University and a couple of applied sciences universities, and it was a full day of discussion. There's SURF, which is a very useful organisation that publish white papers on technology in education in the Netherlands, and that's a collaboration between a lot of HEIs in the Netherlands. There are various events going on about, they call it Next Learning, innovation in education. There's these type of events going on around the world. I didn't actually attend this one, but I was looking through all of the speakers that they had and the type of topics they were talking about. I did attend TEDx Amsterdam Education for the third year in a row, and this is an interesting place to go because it's all purely talks about education, and it helps understand what type of themes. And e-learning did come up a few times, as well as study success being something much broader than just grades. There's the Association of Hogescholen and the Vereniging, my Dutch isn't great, but the Association of the Research Universities in the Netherlands. So these two represent a conglomeration of all the different universities. So their website shows some trends. And there's MOOCs happening as well in the Netherlands at different HEIs. So again, I didn't go into too much depth with these, but it shows that the Hague University of Applied Sciences doesn't operate in isolation. There's all these things going on around them that show the type of trends that are happening, and e-learning and study success is central in a lot of these. I also did some surveys. I combined 4 phases to try and increase the response rate. I was quite disappointed it was quite low considering that there's 25,000 students and around 2,000 staff. I'd really hoped to get a higher input. I tried using my own network and different communication channels and ended up with 28 educators and 29 students. That's relatively low, but I'm not trying to generalize with this research, so it does still support the exploratory nature of this research. And considering that a lot of it was qualitative research, I got some great data that's very valuable. One thing I did is took a blank, that conceptual model that I came up with in the literature review. I didn't want to taint their responses, so it was blank, and I asked them either in person with 2 of the phases or online where they just typed their responses in. And I asked them what they thought were the most important elements of e-learning and study success in the context of higher education. So this is an example of the type of things they came up with. And then I compared their answers. I cross-referenced that to the ones I came up with, and the most important finding here is that the initial conceptual model that I came up with held fast. So that means it can be seen as a robust example of what are the main elements of e-learning and study success. It was also interesting to see that with both educators and students, you can see there that they didn't think that the Hague University is communicating regularly and clearly about e-learning. But most importantly, the majority of respondents believe that e-learning is either crucial, important, or possibly important to study success. There was only one educator who believed that there isn't a relationship between the two, and all the other respondents did. So what this shows very clearly is that people believe that there is a relationship. It's quite a difficult thing to prove, especially with this initial exploratory research, but this is one of the key findings from the data, that people do believe that there is a relationship. I also deepened the responses by interviewing 8 key educators. The way that I chose these were going to the Learn IT website that came up in the observation results, and these are people that are representing the Hague University on this website as being experts in different fields of e-learning. So things like using Blackboard or recording videos. So I approached each of them. I also brought in 2 other people in my professional network for a broader input, and I sat down and interviewed all of them. I made notes and I emailed them the notes to make sure that they were valid, and asked them if there was anything they felt I hadn't captured to correct. And the thesis has all of the data there, and that would be really valuable to people within the Hague University of Applied Sciences, but also outside, to understand the real attitudes and comments that people have about e-learning and study success. This led to interpretation and discussion. Like I've already said, I verified the concept model against the survey, and I aimed to roughly rank the importance of these, but because there's a lot of subjectivity in allocating the words that people came up with, I wouldn't put too much weight on them, except to say that there is a rough kind of importance in the thesis itself. Another key finding was that definitions differ for both e-learning and study success. I did a number of word clouds to show both educators and students how they defined this and the different words that they used, but it did support the definitions that I showed earlier on that I used throughout the research. So that meant that that the research was more valid because their understanding and the understanding that I came to at the beginning did match up. I also looked at operationalizing e-learning and study success, and these emerged in a thematic analysis. These are terms that are in common use at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, and I detailed these a bit more in the thesis as well. This led to an initial conclusion that there is a relationship between e-learning and study success, and that by adding that cog of e-learning to the face-to-face learning, and offering options in the communication of knowledge, which is called a blended learning approach, then the Hague University of Applied Sciences can enhance study success. To actually come up with specific conclusions and recommendations, that's what the next section did. It's a bit hard to read on this slide, of course, but that shows the structure of the final chapter of my thesis. I went through each of the research questions in detail, the aims and objectives, and answered all of them in great detail after having brought together all of the literature review and the fieldwork. I came to some general conclusions. So to answer the central research question, how can e-learning enhance study success? It can enhance it in these 5 ways: by enhancing flexibility, engagement, employability, internationalization, and communication. I came up with 7 recommendations where the Hague University could start to better leverage e-learning, or blended learning as we've established it's more commonly being called. And each of these are also detailed in the thesis, as is an implementation step-by-step framework that I've offered with different suggestions uncovered by the 3 forms of research. Throughout the whole process, I had an open mind with critical reflection. I was aware of limitations. I blogged and vlogged about the process on my own website, and one of the main limitations was the time frame. This was a fairly tight research. I mean, I spent 6 months on this part-time. You could spend, there's so much information, but I kept focused on the research questions. I feel they were answered quite well, and I kept a focus on the research, on answering the research questions and adding value. Another limitation was the participation. As I mentioned earlier, it's a very relatively low response rate, but there was enough for exploratory research. The main contributions of this research were that it offers a quick and robust overview of e-learning. It does start to show that there is a likely link between e-learning and study success, and it gives a snapshot of attitudes and practice at the moment. It supports a shift to blended learning, so I would recommend that blended learning is used more regularly as a term than e-learning. However, in blended learning, you still need an increased element of e-learning, so that should not be forgotten. I've given practical recommendation and places to start, and it's likely to also be applicable and of interest to other higher educational institutions in both the Netherlands and overseas. So what next? Some practical steps of being a University of Applied Sciences. I really wanted to keep this research practical, not just a thesis that kind of gets shoved on a shelf. It's already being distributed, and I've had positive feedback from my dean, from the program director, team leaders, and other staff. And students are also quite interested in the topic. It's being distributed both by myself, but I've also had emails from other educators saying I'm sending this out to my team. I've been invited to contribute to the new network curriculum as a blended learning expert after the summer. And I've made, during this research, even though the scope was at the Hague University, I've also made connections on this topic to other institutions such as TU Delft, Erasmus University, which are the research universities, and also other universities of applied sciences. I plan on submitting journal articles and conference papers after the summer, and that TEDx Amsterdam education I've been to 3 times now. I really want to get up on stage and share some of the elements of things that I've learned in this intensive research process, and the value that e-learning can offer. And further research, both myself personally in the future, but also I've given some research recommendations. So that concludes how can e-learning enhance study success at the Hague University of Applied Sciences. This is my first run of the presentation, and I'm looking at the timer. It's taken almost 25 minutes, and this has to be a 10-minute presentation followed by 40 minutes of questions. So I'm going to go and cut that down significantly. And if you're watching this and you're interested in learning more, please get in touch. You can email me at renee, RENEE, @zesty.com. But I hope you found that interesting. I've loved doing this research project. It's been really a huge learning process for me. Thanks for listening.